Hi there. Today I'm going to try to give you a recording in which I'm going to talk about association and sound in poetry. Um, this is going to be the first of a couple of video lectures that deal with first sound and then image. Um, and I like to do it this way because I want you to think less of sound and image as sort of like isolated, if you will, quarantined elements in poetry, and more in terms of how they create the fabric of the poem as a unity, and also how they function as fuel for the poem, this sort of um, this logical illogic that a poem creates. So first thing I want you to be thinking about as we talk about sound in poetry is a couple of ideas that are introduced by Dean Young in his book, The Art of Recklessness. What he says there is that poetry is a conversion that reveals itself in the instance of its occasion. And I know that just went right over your head. Most of what he says in this book goes over your head for a second, and then you think about it, and then you make of it what you will. In a sense, his book, The Art of Recklessness, is a performance of what he's talking about in poetry. And so it's very associative. It moves very quickly. Its ideas sort of skim along and connect to each other in a very seamless way, but an almost frustratingly seamless way, in much the way that poetry does, because he is associating from one idea, one image, one sound to the next, and letting the language perpetuate itself in the book. Um, and that is to perform this idea of poetry being a conversion that reveals itself in the instance of its occasion. That its logic is much like, and he compares this to fire. Um, if we think about the way a fire spreads, well, it actually spreads in multiple really interesting and fascinating ways if you were to take a look at it scientifically. But say you have a forest fire, and yes, it leaps by contact. A spark so it can like direct contact, and then a spark that maybe floats in the air and catches to a tree branch. And that so it can leap. We talk about fire leaping, and that's one of the ways it leaps. Sometimes a gout of flame can leap and catch something, and that's still, even if it's sending its little emissary as a piece of ash going into a tree, it's still by contact. But it can also happen through a different kind of context, just through heat conversion. So a fire creates enough heat over here, then the dry material over here reaches a certain point where it bursts to flame. And poetry definitely functions that way. Um, and today, and it happens on a language level. Um, so if we were to take a look, for example, at a word like blue, well, contained within the word blue are all of its associative possibilities. You think about it. So if I were to say the word blue to you, what immediately leaps to mind? Well, probably you're going to associate it with things that are the color blue: sky, veins, flames, all right, all of those things. Now, what I've just done also, though, is I've created a word palette. We'll get back to that: sky, flames, and veins. In fact, unconsciously, I probably connected flames. The word veins probably was suggested to me by the word flames, because normally when we think of veins, we think of blood and we think the color red, which is incorrect. It's actually blue. But when we think about blue veins, that word was suggested by the other word on the basis of sound. Also contained within the word of blue are all the cultural associations we make. So we can say to someone, how are they feeling? They're saying, I'm feeling blue. Well, they don't look blue, but they are emotionally sad because we've associated the word blue with emotional quality. There's also the blues, which somewhat is from the emotional quality, but now we associate with a certain style and kind of music. It actually is a form. People write blues poems in the form of blues lyrics. Also within the blues, we have blue notes, which have no color to them. They're a sound, but it might be a note that's not quite the right pitch or the key or is out of time. And we say that that note is blue because of its sort of weird effect on the strange defying, sort of like defamiliarizing effect it has on the song. It seems to fit, even though it doesn't fit, in an almost uncanny way. But also blue contains all the sounds that it contains. So if I were to say that the word blue connects to the word bugle, um, well, it does in obvious ways. And let's talk about what those ways are. Right now, I'm going to share with you a little handout that hopefully will will help us along here. Um, so here's some of the concepts we're going to be covering today. First of all, rhyme. Um, I'm continually amazed by how my students are stuck in this idea that rhymes must come at the end of poems in this sort of steady rhythmic way, when nothing they listen to, maybe some poorly written country music and poorly written rock music, in really bad rap does this. In fact, a recent um, Eminem song makes fun of the rapper Machine Gun Kelly for how simple and regular his rhymes are. It's actually one of the few entertaining Eminem songs that have come out recently. But because Eminem is actually an Olympic level athlete when it comes to executing the language. He changed or strongly influenced the way rap functions. Of course, everything he does was borrowed from people that came before him. I'm going to talk about one of those people in a second. But rhyme can come up anywhere in a poem, and there are all sorts of different kinds of rhyme. And if we, certainly blue rhymes with to and through, but you can have much more complex and interesting rhymes with any word. And so here are some of them. Perfect rhyme is when two words rhyme in sound and in syllable. It's like ball and fall. I get most interesting in rhyme, though, when we get into things like off rhyme, slant rhyme, imperfect rhyme, when two words rhyme in incomplete ways, creating a broader sonic landscape. So, for example, some types of rhyme, vowel rhyme or consonant rhyme, where one word rhymes with the other just on the basis of a single sound that it picks up. And so it creates an unconscious connection between the words um, that is a little more complicated than the simple rhyme would provide, because it also introduces other sounds that can then be picked up later within the sonic landscape of the poem. And that can perpetuate more different kinds of words, create them like fire. There's also conceptual rhyme. We'll talk more about that when I do a short video lecture on imagery a little bit later on, an image pattern. But conceptual rhymes are words that we simply associate with each other very strongly. So, it's sort of like when a psychiatrist might, do word association, ask you to say a word, and you respond with another word you connect to it. Sometimes that will be a rhyme, but sometimes it will have nothing to do with it. So, if someone says father and you immediately say power or anger, that's interesting because it does connect a couple of the sounds. They don't necessarily rhyme except in the ERs at the end of the word. But we're really connecting a concept that we've associated with the Father. Someone might say God. That's definitely a conceptual rhyme, Father, God. Um, in rhyme simply means when a rhyme occurs not at the end of a line, but interior to the rhyme scheme. You've all been introduced, I hope, at some point in your academic lives to alliteration, when the first letter of a word is repeated in subsequent words. We'll take a look at that. Assonance as well. Assonance is vowel rhyming. The two words essentially for the same thing. It's when the long O or the long I or any vowel sound gets repeated throughout a piece. And this is where we find the dominant sounds that a poet likes to use. Um, and those sounds can help to affect tone, they can help to affect speed and pace, but they can also help to simply connect different ideas together that we might not have done, and to perpetuate words that are maybe not quite logical or rational in a sort of hyper controlling sort of way. Then we have consonance, which is a repetition of consonant sounds. Alliteration is a type of consonance, but in consonance, the repetition of the sounds can happen anywhere in the words. So, in a sense, the boogie woogie bugle boy, right? He has alliteration, but it also has consonants going and assonants going throughout the line. I don't know why I just gave that as an example when I have a much better example to follow here. This is a rap lyric from 1987 by Eric B. and Rakim. It really shows kind of like the origins of the type of rap that you hear today in Eminem, but also in Kendrick Lamar, Chance the Rapper, like anybody who we look at as being someone who's extremely effective and talented rapper who has a kind of has a high level of execution when we think about sound and largely flow, which is the same word. Actually, we use flow when we talk about poetry in exactly the same way that we think about it in rap. But to have flow is to have this very strong mastery of the sound and associative capacity of language, and being able to let one word perpetuate the next word without seemingly needing to think about it. So here's Follow the Leader by Eric B. and Rakim, and I'm just going to read it. I'm not going to try to rap it because I'm not good at rapping necessarily. But you know, I want you to pay attention to what he's doing with letting the words be the fuel of the poem as it creates, almost seemingly creates itself. Follow me into a solo, get in the flow, and you could picture like a photo. Music makes mellow, maintains to make, melodies for MCs, motivates the breaks. I'm everlasting, I can go on for days and days, with rhyme displays that engrave deep as x-rays. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Now, of course, there is some end rhyming going on there, and that is its own kind of pleasure. But what's really interesting, one of the reasons those end rhymes are so pleasurable, is because he leads us to them with all these associative sound bridges that are happening throughout the piece. And it's a highly seated and incredibly integrated sonic landscape. So if you look at Follow Me into the Solo, Get in the Flow, and you could picture like a photo, music makes mellow, maintains to make. All right, let's just start there. Follow me into the solo. So the dominant sounds at the beginning of the lyric are established right at the beginning of the poem. In the first word, that O, that long O, creates the word solo. It actually perpetuates that, and then it creates flow. So you actually have three rhymes within one line. And these are pretty these are pretty traditional rhymes, simple rhymes: follow, solo, flow. But you've got follow, which is two syllables, solo, which is two syllables, and then you have flow. It's almost a reduction, like a crystallizing of the sound elements. Flow and follow is almost a compression. Flow is almost a compression of that word. And you could picture like a photo. Photo picks up all of the elements of those three sounds and adds a new one with the T. Then in the next line, music makes mellow. Mellow, certainly we recognize, it rhymes, is an interior rhyme to follow, but a pretty close rhyme to photo. But it also introduces the M sounds that are so dominant in that language. It creates a bridge between the O's and the M's and the L's that have been maintained. Maintains to make creates a bridge with break, which comes down in the next line, but we have the L's and the M's sustained, but make motivates breaks. It's not just and maintains. You hear all the long A sounds. I mean, I could go through the whole piece, but it's actually an incredible example of how this kind of logical illogic of words perpetuating much as fire does. And it's also exuberant, and you can feel the propulsive forward energy of the poem that those sounds create. I'm going to take a look at what might more traditionally be called a poem in Prologue and Then She Owns You. This is a poem from Patricia Smith's wonderful book, Blood Dazzler, which is about Hurricane Katrina and its devastating effects on on Louisiana, and specifically the city of New Orleans. In this poem, she's personifying the city of New Orleans. And there's a whole bunch of interesting things that you could say about this poem in terms of its associative movement. But we're going to focus right now mostly on sound and how it perpetuates itself through sound in much the same way that Follow the Leader does, for different purposes, but with many of the exact same techniques and even some of the same sounds. Um, this is not mourning. There is a nastiness, slowing your shoes, something you shouldn't step in. It's shattered beads, stomped flowers, vomit. Such stupid beauty. Beauty you can stick a manicured finger into and through. Beauty that doesn't rely on any sentence the sun chants. It's whiskey, swelter, blown, scarlet. All right, I'm just going to stop there. And I could keep going, but I'm going to stop there to talk about all of the things that she's done. Certainly, the first stanza almost creates the sonic palette of the poem. And in this poem, I'm also going to talk about how the sounds actually, in this case, perpetuate some of the themes of the work. Certainly, that's true in Follow the Leader as well, but which is almost an ars poetica, and certainly a wonderful example of well, just about everything good that can happen in a rap song, but also the swagger of that poem. But this poem has some swagger in it too. Um, but there's kind of something very interesting going on here, in which the words perpetuate themselves through sound, but also help to develop a kind of redefining or conceptualization of concepts of beauty and even love and human interconnectedness and how these things happen. All right, let's get back to sounds. The most obvious thing that's happening in the first stanza is alliteration. We have slowing your shoes, something you shouldn't step in, shattered beads, stomped flowers, vomit, such stupid. I mean, there's just a ton of, of, um, of S's and alliteration going on there. But you should also recognize the T sounds, the dental, we call those dental sounds, the T sounds that are showing up: shattered, stupid, stomped, nastiness, not, the step, shouldn't. All of these sounds are perpetuating each other. It's a very rich but very integrated sonic landscape already that we are introduced here. But very quickly, there are some words that seem to clang against each other: nastiness and beauty, stupid and beauty. We don't tend to think of beauty as stupid, but maybe it's a commentary on the profession of prostitution. I don't know, but or maybe just the visceral quality of it, the unthinking quality of how we react to beauty. Beauty you can stick a manicured finger into and through. Now look at that. So beauty gets, we have a lexical repetition, which just means a repetition of the same word: beauty, beauty, and then it comes up again, beauty. So in case you're wondering, she's saying something about beauty here inherently. Well, what is she saying? Well, we've talked about its visceral sort of like quality, the way that this is something we react to. But it's interesting that we have these ideas of nastiness and stupidity. And I want you to think about the sounds that are repeated there. So we have this long, this ooh sound, which actually was picked up: shoes, beauty, beauty, right? Um, but there are other sounds that are starting to be included there too. You can stick a manicured finger into and through, there's through. Into and through both continue that long O sound, but also create a transformative effect. I'm absolutely convinced that the word through was suggested by the sounds that preceded it and the rhythm of it, but it also creates a transformative conversion here of the idea. It doesn't just go into something, it goes through it. It moves. Beauty that doesn't rely on any sentence the sun chants, bringing back the S sounds. It's whiskey, swelter, brown, scarlet. Now, whiskey, sonically, what is it connected most to? Beauty, which is, and also to nasty. Nasty, whiskey, beauty. which asks us to reconsider what we consider to be beautiful, that beauty may not be pleasant or nice, that beauty might even have a kind of poison in it or a dangerous quality, and still be nothing less than beauty. Certainly, that is partly what's going on here. Um, you know, some of the sounds that we seem to have left behind for a while in the first line, the N's and M's of the first line, then get picked up in the next stanza in name, name, right? Um, so you can see this is perpetually happening. Um, if you could basically go through the entire poem and find in every stanza sounds that are introduced or connected to, in much the way the fire bursts, creates the flame through its own heat 10 feet away. Um, in the same way that the N at the beginning of the poem creates not only an N later in the poem, but the other letters that were connected to it sort of erupting and bursting into flame and flower later on in the poem. And they are all seated at the beginning. So what happens is the poem becomes incredibly coherent and satisfying and pleasurable on this very unconscious level, even when it's talking about something dark or nasty or poisonous. Um, and in doing so, creates a complicating of our conceptions of what is nasty, ugly, poisonous, and what is beautiful. Um, Certainly you can go through this whole poem and recognize the I think it's a great exercise, but it's also a great, to me, a very freeing conception of the way poems function. That you don't have to be in control of everything all the time. That the words, as Richard Hugo says in Triggering Town, that the ideas in a poem can conform to the music, that the music can make ideas, um, and that we can trust the language and all its associated capacity and power to generate complex and interesting ideas. Now, of course, in the revision process, we want to figure out what's working and what isn't, what combinations are functioning to grow the poem, because we don't want it to just be random ultimately, but we want to be open to the logic of randomness, the art of recklessness, as Dean Young says in the title of his book. That poetry um, is is uh, is functionally working on this, logical illogic, this sense that comes of nonsense, and this freeing quality. And one can definitely get there through the power and the movement of its music. All right. That's all I've got for you today. If you want to take a look at the entire poem, um, you certainly can for prologue, and then She Owns You. Go to Poetry Foundation. You can also listen to Patricia Smith read the poem. I strongly suggest you do that. Patricia Smith is a diva in every sense. She is a queen of the poetry world right now. Get anything you can by her and read it all. And maybe go back and listen to a little Eric B. and Rakim too. It's not going to hurt you, that's for sure. All right. I hope you are all well and staying safe. And I'm going to end this meeting now.